Hello, and welcome to part 47. Just wanted to talk about a few things. Um, let's see. First thing I wanted to mention was social injustice, and it sometimes leads to unrest or conflict. Um, Not a good thing. So being fair to people, being just to people is important. We don't want to have, in truth, any conflict. And then another thing that's unfair is not having the appropriate government or the right government for a given people or people in general. It should be a certain kind of government. And I'd ask the U.S. to maybe lend a hand. I know this seems presumptuous or maybe even seems to you arrogant, but I think the U.S. Constitution is a good model for any government. We do have to keep cultures intact or what they'd like them to be, but I believe that there is a way to come up with a generic blueprint, and I know the U.S. Constitution talks of certain places in the U.S., and it could be transposed to just about any government. Uh, and religion does is important to people. Some people, not all, but it has no place in a government. I mean, you can um, you know on the side mention what's correct regarding religion. Um, but religion, state and religion should be separate. And so you have governance, and then maybe you have certain rules or certain things to follow in your religion, which shouldn't encroach upon other people, like extremism or something where people are going to blow themselves up or hurt people or whatever, or impose certain things upon women. I've said some of these things before, but I do believe it's important. So again, I'd call on the U.S. government and those that are able. I mean, I know sometimes we get a politician that isn't quite right for this kind of thing. But if we could come up with some sort of blueprint for governments around the world, democratic capitalism being more prevalent in societies or prevalent everywhere, I think we'd have a more prosperous world and nations to themselves in themselves a better government imposing strict rules and things, edicts from religion, not a good idea. I think it just goes without saying, in my opinion, but maybe not to you. It should be minus religion, and then we keep morals in mind and ethics in mind when we create a government. Certain inalienable rights, equality. We hold these truths to be self-evident, meaning people are all equal, should be treated equal. Discrimination is always wrong. So let's keep these things in mind. It's so important. Um, let's see, what else? It just, I mean, I'm sort of repeating myself, but it seems unfair, uh, you know, almost bordering on not smart to have not the right government for your people. I mean, whoever they may be, wherever they may be. It just, it irks me to know that there are certain governments that are not right for people, and Maybe it's the embarking on the transition that's so difficult, and so that's why I was thinking maybe people. I mean, some people are educated abroad in the United States about U.S. government, or maybe U.S. government is taught in other countries, but these people that receive this education and excel at it should probably volunteer themselves, those that are willing. I know it can be a dangerous endeavor sometimes, but um, should try and get themselves to participate in government building around the world there, which it's needed. And it's so very important. I mean, I can't stress it enough. I mean, our government apparently was bamboozled by a foreign power, and I understand why. I don't necessarily pass judgment on them for their motives. They started out possibly altruistic and then did something we found unacceptable, and we started the sanctions process, and it's gone from there. It's just gotten worse, I think, in my opinion. The Assad regime, Iran acting out. I understand they want to go against ISIL. I wish there wasn't so much turmoil in Syria. I mean, people need to return to where they live, and the people are displaced. People have even left the country. People are opposed to a dictatorship. So these are things to keep in mind. Russia is also helping the Assad regime, and I don't think that's what's best. I think they should find another kind of government, a democratic, capitalistic one, and have elections. Albeit some are abroad, they can still vote, maybe cast a ballot and send it in. This would have to be a major overtaking, make sure it's a free and fair election. People want to return, I'd imagine, to their homeland and rebuild and build anew. So it's all very important in Syria and elsewhere. I'm trying to think where else. I mean, anywhere. And I think in the Mideast there are many problems. And I'm not trying to point fingers, but I think Israel could be more forthcoming with a plan, working towards an end, a two-state solution. I know there's good people there. I mean, I know this. I wonder, is it the mistrust? Is it they don't trust themselves? What is it that keeps them from having a multi-ethnic Jerusalem and then allowing for the Palestinians and the Israelis to coexist in certain places? I mean, primarily it'll be Israel, be Israelis, and primarily in Palestine it'll be Palestinians. But there will be some overlap, and then especially in Jerusalem where the holy sites are. They've got to coexist, and so I thought maybe in the interim, in the very beginnings, a UN policekeeping entity, possibly even armed, maybe what's best, but they would have to be screened to the max, to coin a phrase, maximum security check on these people, should they carry a firearm or whatever. Rubber bullets being better. Is there a way to police in the most peaceful way? I mean, always use the most peaceful means, and exist there under not an occupation, but just there to have peacekeepers maintain a peace until things are settled. And they're not there to pass judgment. I mean, maybe there are certain things that are unacceptable, like violence or something, instigating or something like that. They could deal with certain issues like that. But I believe that both these people are great. These nations are great, and I wish them well. I wish Palestinians well. I wish Israelis well. I know it may seem like like a union that should not be after all the years of strife. But even Yitzhak Rabin wanted peace. I just don't think at the time the map allowed for it. And, someone objected, youth, and said no way. And, saying no way is just not an option. I mean, we get disaster. The Middle East is in unrest because I'm not saying primarily, but possibly in part due to the lack of peace, a peace accord between Palestine and Israel. So this is something to keep in mind, that it is of paramount importance, and allowing people to get to those holy sites is important. Can you, if they're going to stay there, can they make a buck, or is it not meant to be that way? These are things to be resolved by the parties. Possibly the UN knows what's best. I mean, it seems a right of any people that want to see these sites. So it is maybe an imposition, but at the same time, maybe those people can make money off of it, Palestinians included, and I think everyone should be treated as equals, and be prosperous and civil to one another. I mean, these name callings things and whatnot. Um, just it needs to be an era of getting along, and getting along well would be something to strive for. Working together to get this done, and working well together alongside one another. Um, excuse me. Not all the time. There are times when there'll just be a group of Israelis living, amongst themselves, or at a time when there are just Palestinians, and then a time when there's some overlap, and we accept this, and then people around the world may flock to Jerusalem if it's acceptable, um, hiding it from the rest of the world. And I don't fault Israelis for the death of Christ. I know this is strange, but my belief is that it was not them that caused it. It may have been a storyline that was written for a reason. I think the storyline was just to represent that there's uh, everlasting life, like you live on and on. There's a process where everyone is accounted for, everything is accounted for. This table off to my left is um, just it's also going to exist. I mean, everything is accounted for, and that's how infinite things are, and people get to live a perfect plus infinite life one day. I think is the truth. Minus maybe what happens in an environment like this. We have things that drag us down, but maybe if we're a better planet, we can get to the point where everything is good and safe, and the past is, we're enlightened about the past, and it's not as bad as it seemed. Like maybe the Holocaust. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of this, but maybe it didn't happen. Maybe day one of history was, 1968 or something or whatever. I know we look back and we have memories of, or footage of, or we have the written word and all this, but what is truth? How do we know things are true? So just keep that in mind. Although there is good advice to be had, or good lessons, or good structures of government that do exist, and not that they can't be built upon, like the U.S. government, yet again, has room for amendments. As the future plays out, there'll be a time when there needs to be amendments, new facts shed light, and new situations, and so amendments need to be made, but yet we have checks and balances to keep it from being something that's not correct. So the three branches check each other, and there's votes in each of these branches to ensure that it's more than just the majority. It's usually 2/3. Ratified by a 2/3 majority vote is often how it goes. And then there can be a veto. Is that all correct? Let's make sure we get that all very correct. So I would like to see democracy, and in particular democratic capitalism, flourish around the globe. If we were all on the same page that way, then wouldn't trade go much better? And again, I'll reiterate my idea of trade instead of tariffs and whatnot, where we have, why not just trade and then split the cost of export or import between the two parties. Maybe make it easier to do trade, encourage trade, and that's not to say buying from your own country isn't a wise thing to do. It is, but if we buy from others, then maybe they'll buy from us. Is the theory. In a free capitalistic society, it does yield great benefits, great product and services at an affordable price, and then so the businesses do good volume, and hopefully if they do something really great, they can charge a little more, make a good buck, and so it all works, and it works for the consumer. If you work well, if you work a little harder, if you do a better job, there's incentive there to get a raise or promotion or something like that. Things that we find more important or more valuable. Sometimes these people get paid more, and so it's a good incentive to have people that do these things, and it really does work. And I don't like the censorship thing, because this is probably not getting heard by China or maybe by Russians, or I'm just trying to think who would benefit from these words. I'm not kidding myself in saying, I'm saying all the right things. I don't think I am. There's things I'm leaving out, but maybe someone else could take the ball and run with it with this. The UN does believe in democracy, I believe, and so the spread of democracy is important. How do we do that? How do we educate people? There's language barriers, there's cultural barriers, there's religion barriers, so it needs to happen. It's just a matter of time, which we may not have time to just say, okay, let's leave this a dictatorship, or let's leave this communism, or true socialism, or something like that. I mean, we can't afford these, shall I call them, mistakes in government. So we need to have a situation where everyone has the proper government. And I've said this already. So I'm going to go. But maybe there is something in the UN, a mechanism in the UN that helps with nation building and government building, and a mechanism maybe from the United States, from those countries that teach U.S. government, the U.S. Constitution in particular. Maybe they can lend a hand. I mean, maybe actually offer their services, offer their expertise, write more books on it, have it written in other languages. I kind of wish everything were in English. English were the primary language of Earth. But that's not to say the English are special. I'm not trying to, exalt anyone. But I think England, uh, it gave birth to the United States of America, and then we were given, possibly by divinity and our forefathers working together, they came up with a new system, and I think it's very valid. It's gone through many changes since then, and I said I was going to go. So this is the end of part 47.